more analysis now of the COVID situation around the country. Joining me live is political consultant Jim Middleton, who's live with us from Melbourne. Jim, starting on your home state of Victoria, 455 new cases today. Like New South Wales, the Premier didn't front the cameras today, although his deputy was there. Should we be outraged by Premiers not fronting up daily? Are we putting too high an expectation on their ability to do so?
Good afternoon to you, Ashley. Look, whether leaders, premiers, prime ministers turn up for news conferences is entirely up to them, but I don't think it's a particularly good look, and I am a little surprised at those journalists who think they would prefer fewer opportunities for public scrutiny of our leaders, whether at the state or federal level. I spent 5 decades struggling to find out what was going on, trying to hold politicians to account, and I would never ever have willingly given up the opportunity or suggested it was better to have fewer opportunities face-to-face encounters at news conferences with politicians. News conferences are not perfect, no doubt about it. Questions are not always perfect, but it's a heck of a lot better than the opposite. I'm intrigued too that Gladys Berejiklian seems to think that accountability is something that she will determine when she thinks that she should be accountable. In a democracy, accountability is permanent, and being Premier of a state is a permanent job. It's not a part-time gig. So I find that a bit odd. I'm also intrigued that on Sky, for example, when those 11 o'clock press conferences were happening, or as they continue to happen, the audience leaps by, it comes close to doubling. That would seem to me to indicate that people are interested. If Gladys Berejiklian also thinks that they're creating anxiety among the population, I do wonder whether that says more about her performance than it does about the attitude of the people. If she is creating anxiety, if these events are creating anxiety, it's because perhaps of what she says. One other thing too is that this provides a very rare opportunity for politicians to speak directly to the people without any intervention. At the top of news conferences we've seen, whether it be Gladys Berejiklian, Dan Andrews or Scott Morrison, they get an opportunity to address the public directly at the top. The questions follow. So for mine, I don't like the idea of our politicians in the middle of what is the most life-threatening crisis we've had since World War II, thinking that accountability is somehow optional and something that they will decide on a case-by-case, day-by-day basis.
Here, Jim, talking about anxiety-inducing measures. Some quarters of the population seem to be worried about this idea of introducing vaccination passports. It is a debate that we're seeing raging in the United States, which is probably not surprising there with their love of freedom, as we know. What about here in Australia? Are you expecting that broadly this will be hugely controversial here?
The United States is not Australia. Australia is not the United States. The nature of the debate is different, and our attitudes, although we are both very powerful democracies, are notably different. This individualism, which is at the centre of American democracy, is not quite as apparent here. The debate will go on. I doubt that it will have quite the traction that people like Matt Canavan would hope, and I suspect that one way or another we're going to see relatively ready compliance with conditions being put on things, whether we go to footy matches, to concerts, or whether we go to restaurants and so on and so forth, and certainly whether we travel. These things will happen, and I think by and large Australians will be more ready than not to accept them, and I think the polling seems to indicate that as well. So I can understand where Matt Canavan's coming from. I do think that we do need to protect our individual rights, but sometimes the collective is also important, and I suspect that in these circumstances, the way debate has been going on over the past year and a half and discussions been going on, and behaviour as well, that most Australians, in fact the vast bulk of Australians, will be prepared to comply.
Jim Middleton, appreciate your analysis as always. Thank you.
My pleasure, Ash, as always.